I look like I'm an evil cat lady in a movie, like petting my cat, like, welcome to my lair. Hello, book friends, and welcome back to Books and Tea Time. We have a special guest today. Can you hear him purring? I'm Addie, and this is Killua. So anyway, I sat down to start this video, and he immediately started being super, super cute and wants attention now. So welcome to today's video. Today, it's rainy outside. It's a Saturday. I have the day off. I'm in my comfy clothes. We're sitting here on the couch. We've got a cat in our lap, and I just want to talk about some books I've read recently that I really loved. So I was originally gonna do like a full-on wrap-up for February and March, but I think I just want to talk about books that I've enjoyed today. So today we're talking about recent reads, but for February, March, and April, because I've read a lot of really good books so far in the month of April. Basically like my 4- and 5-star reads from February, March, and April that I haven't talked about yet, because I have 2 reading vlogs on my channel from February and March where I read books that I really, really loved, but I talked about them a lot for those vlogs, so I'm kind of just gonna like redirect you to those. But I want to talk about books that I haven't talked about on camera yet that I've really loved. So I have my notes here, and we've got 12 books to talk about today. I'm gonna do these, I think, roughly in the order that I read them. So for the first one, we're going all the way back to February. Most of the books that I read in February, I vlogged for a romance reading vlog that I did where I read, I think, 6 romance books by Black authors, and that video was so much fun. So please go watch that if you haven't already, because I talk about all the books that I read in detail, and I really loved all of the books that I read. But one of the most standout reads, if not the standout read, was Ring Shout by P. Jelle Clark. I absolutely loved this book. It's a novella, and it's kind of like a historical horror, like alternate history. Our main characters are monster hunters, and they hunt monsters that are masquerading as members of the KKK, and I think it's set in the 1920s. So it's kind of like this alternate history horror novella, and like I said, like our main characters are tasked with figuring out which members of the KKK are not so human and taking them out so that they don't like gain power. Basically like these monsters from like another reality or another world are infiltrating the KKK and like feeding on the hatred and the anger, drawing upon the power of white supremacy and anti-Black racism in America. Our main characters are so cool. I can't recall the names off the top of my head, but our main character has like this magical sword. I love a magic sword. That is one of like my, as someone who reads a lot of fantasy, that's one of my like micro tropes that I really enjoy. So seeing it in more of like a horror space was really enjoyable. I don't want to say too much about like the magic of the sword, because again, this is a novella, so like I don't want to say too much other than it is so good. It is fantastic. A lot of the times, I really like novellas, but a lot of the times I feel like one of my common complaints with novellas is that I wish there was more, right? Because I am a sucker for like great like slow burn character development and like world building. So I feel like usually novellas, I enjoy them, but I'm like, I wish they were a little bit longer. But this is one of those rare exceptions where Clark uses every page, every sentence to its absolute perfect advantage, to the point that it is like the perfect contained narrative. This is one that I definitely want to purchase a physical copy of, because I did the audiobook, which I actually do highly recommend the audiobook. The audiobook is really good, but I want to own it and eventually reread it and annotate it. I feel like this is because I read so many books audibly through the library. I'm constantly running into this cycle where I read a really fantastic book and I'm like, now I need to buy a physical copy so that I can annotate it at a future date. So this is definitely going on my half-price books used bookstore wish list, and I've seen a lot of people online recommend reading this if you liked the movie Sinners, and I actually had not seen Sinners, and then when I read this book I loved it so much that I immediately watched Sinners after, and of course loved Sinners so much. So I would say that's definitely an accurate like book recommendation, and I definitely agree with people who recommend that. Okay, the next book on this list is a prime example of I read it as an ebook, and 6 pages into reading this, I knew that I simply had to own it, so I bought it. And that is Like a Hammer, Poets on Mass Incarceration, edited by Diana Marie Delgado. So this is an anthology of poems. Like I said, I read this as an ebook through the library, and then I ordered it. It took a while for it to get to me, so I had actually finished reading it digitally, but very, very high up on my list is rereading and annotating it this year because this was absolutely brilliant. Like I said, this is a collection of poems by both people who have been incarcerated and also family members of people who have been incarcerated and like their experiences with the prison industrial complex in America. Before I even had gotten to the poems itself, the foreword is by Kianga Yamada Taylor, who we're also going to talk about in a couple more books. But she writes a foreword, and just simply reading the foreword, I knew that I was going to have to annotate it. There's just so much. This happens to me every once in a while where I start a book and I know I cannot not annotate it. The same thing happened to me when I was reading In the Dream House last year by Carmen Maria Machado. I was listening to it as an audiobook and I had to stop. I think I stopped at like 20%, started over, and did a tandem read where I listened to it and physically read it and annotated it at the same time. There's some writing, some authors and, writers, poets in particular, that just demand something in me to engage on like a different level than what I would do regularly. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly. The closest thing I can compare it to is like when I would read a book in college and like know that I was going to discuss it with people and that I had to pull things out and felt compelled to pull things out that stuck out to me. Like, it's a similar feeling where I knew that I was going to want to talk about this book with so many people, and I knew that I was going to want to think about and return to parts of this so frequently that I just know that I have to annotate it. I found a couple poets in here that I really do want to make an effort to read more of their stuff, specifically Natalie Diaz. I actually checked out 2 of her poetry collections from the library, and I have them over there on a table because I want to read those this month. And Hanif Abdurraqib has been on my radar for a while because one of my friends at work absolutely loves his stuff. But overall, truly every poem in this collection is so wonderful. And as someone who has had the privilege of not having to consider the prison industrial complex growing up, but someone who over the past couple of years specifically, I have been trying to educate myself a lot more about prison abolition. I don't know. I just feel like this was a really brilliant way to explore that, and also at the same time just expose me to a lot of really brilliant poetry. So I highly, highly, highly recommend this. Check it out. Like a Hammer. Okay, next we're taking a little bit of a detour, and we're going to talk about, this is one of my 2 most anticipated books this year, A Ghastly Catastrophe by Deanna Rayburn. This is book 10 to the Veronica Speedwell series, which is a historical mystery series. I don't know if you can see that far back, but this is my stack right here of all of my Veronica Speedwell's books 1 through 9. These books I have gotten not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 people in my life to read these books. All of them love them as much as I do. This book came out in March. This is the 10th book, as I said, in the Veronica Speedwell series. And I actually was so lucky, and I went to one of her events. Like, she did a book tour for A Ghastly Catastrophe, and my friends and I went on a little road trip because she didn't come to my city, but she came within driving distance, a reasonable driving distance. And so I met her and I got my copy signed and personalized, which is so exciting. She also signed my copy of book 4, A Dangerous Collaboration, which is my favorite in the series. And she is an absolute delight in person. Like, it's kind of scary sometimes when you meet authors. You don't know if they're going to be like what you hope they are. She's exactly what you'd expect from reading these books and more. She's so delightful, so kind, so funny, very intelligent, and I just had an absolutely fantastic time. So we actually listened to this audiobook in the car on the way there and on the way back from the little road trip, but this was so good. It was so fun. This is like her take on like vampire lore. I don't want to say too much. Obviously, like it's the 10th installment in a series. I thought that she did a really good job with it. It's very clever, especially if you know Veronica, our main character, and Stoker, her like partner in crime. They are very like, they're natural historians, so they're scientifically minded. So they are not ones to just believe in vampires. So I thought that the way she handled it was really clever and funny. Also, I'm not gonna say too much on this because again, it's book 10 and it just came out. But if you've read this, there are some Tiberius developments. I am a Tiberius fangirl. Tiberius is Stoker's older brother. So he's like one of the side characters that is woven throughout the whole series. I'm obsessed with him. And we get some very interesting Tiberius developments in this book. And when I tell you, in the middle of the car ride, I stopped the audiobook and squealed and screamed about it for like 5 whole minutes. I am being dead serious. Please, if you know what I'm talking about, message me on some sort of social media platform because I will always and forever want to talk about these books, okay? Always. Okay, I told you we were gonna return to Kianga Taylor because next we are talking about How We Get Free, Black Feminism, and the Combahee River Collective, edited by Kianga Taylor. So this is a nonfiction title. It has the introduction by Kianga Taylor, then it has the original Combahee River Collective statement, and then Taylor interviews Barbara and Beverly Smith, who are sisters, and Demita Frazier, all 3 of whom were writers of the original statement itself. And she also interviews Alicia Garza, who I believe is the founder or one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. And then the last bit is not an interview, but there is included a comments from Barbara Ramsey at the Socialism 2017 conference panel about Combahee River Collective. So this is a collection of interviews and one conference talk that all center on the Combahee River Collective and specifically their brand of Black feminism. And I, as you can see, annotated the crap out of this. I really enjoyed it. It was really cool to see through the interviews and also through reading this statement how this particular group of women and their statement of Black feminism is a response to other movements, particularly the white women's movement, deliberately leaving out Black women from the conversation and from the sphere. One of the main tenets that you learn about by reading the statement is that their assertion is that nobody is truly free until the most oppressed, i.e. Black women, Black trans women, people who are multiply marginalized, until they are free, no one is really free. And I really enjoyed this. I also really enjoyed learning about how Combahee's particular feminist philosophy is deeply, deeply rooted in anti-capitalism. There are so many moments from this that I marked to return to, things that I just really want to sit with and like chew on. But in particular, I want to try and find one of the most impactful quotes to me personally. This is on the last page of the Combahee River Collective statement itself. Eliminating racism in the white women's movement is by definition work for white women to do, but we continue to speak and demand accountability on the issue. That moment really hit me and stuck with me. I think there is a tendency towards, especially for like myself as a white person and like seeing this in other white people who are actively trying to unlearn and relearn a lot of our history and information about what this country has actually endeavored to do over its entire history and before it was even founded. I think there's a tendency and I've seen it in myself and had to check it in myself, where like once you start to gain some of this knowledge, you want to distance yourself from people you know, from fellow white people that you encounter who haven't done this work yet or are at a different point in their journey, and like wanting to distance yourself from them, like, oh, you know, they don't know what I know, they're problematic, they're such and such, but like that is absolutely counterproductive to what we are supposed to be taking away from texts like this and from activists and people whose work we are studying and learning from. I think it's really important to remember that it is our job primarily as white people to educate and commune with and share information with other white people to mitigate the damage and like stop the bleeding, so to speak, before we can even get to a point where we can truly join a fight for liberation of all peoples. We can't just turn away from that. It's really important that we don't. And I think that's something that, you know, I have been reckoning with a lot. And I think that I absolutely needed to read this at the time that I did as that gentle reminder, like, hey, this is your primary task. This is your primary objective, you specifically. Okay, the next few books on this list I don't own physically. I did all of them on audio. Next up we have House of Bone and Rain by Gabino Iglesias. This is a thriller horror hybrid story that takes place in Puerto Rico, and it follows a group of friends right on the cusp of transitioning from young adulthood to adulthood. So they have like just graduated high school at the beginning of this book. It's this very tightly knit group of friends, and one of the friends' moms is gunned down in the street. And so it is a very gruesome revenge story where this group of friends, you know, is coming to stand behind their friend as they seek justice and retribution for the death of their mother. And so that's centrally what the story is about, but it has so much more than that I really thoroughly enjoyed. So in addition to that, like I said, the central focal point of this revenge story, we are also, it's contained within a very short period of time where a hurricane is descending upon the island. And it's one of the most devastating hurricanes that the island has seen in years. And so you're seeing people, you know, turning inward to shelter in their homes, and the narrative arc itself and some of the characters are represented through this storm, but the storm also almost takes on its own character, like it becomes a character in and of itself. It was just, I loved the way that he handled the storm, the hurricane imagery in the book, and how it is just echoed throughout. I thought that was very clever and well done. There's also a lot of wonderful commentary and discussion on what it's like to live in Puerto Rico and experience these devastating hurricanes that completely decimate infrastructure, and to get no assistance virtually from America, which has colonized and, you know, adopted Puerto Rico as a territory. Just quite a beautiful tapestry of rage and coming of age and coming into oneself and understanding how you move in the world, and particularly in the context of like what the world and what society subjects you to. I didn't think that I would like it as much because we're following a cast fully of male main characters for the most part, and just like they're very, I wouldn't say that they're like macho per se, but it's very like brotherly love, which I thought would be a little bit difficult for me to connect with. But I think that the author does a great job of bringing you as the reader into the fold of their friendship and what it's like to just like have each other's backs, but also like the tension of that, and like knowing that like you're probably making a bad decision by, you know, coming to help your friend, but like it's your friend and he's been there for you, and you can't imagine a world where you're not there for him. I don't know, it was just really surprising to me how much I connected with the story from that angle, if that makes sense. But there are also a few perspectives from female main characters that are woven into the storyline, and I think that those definitely helped me and were very powerful to see it from that angle as well. The book also takes a very interesting turn at the end. I won't say anything about it because I obviously don't want to spoil, but very unusual. Loved it so much. And I read this for book club, and I think that we were very evenly divided on our reaction to how things wrap up in the end. And I, myself, and a couple other people were firmly on the, okay, that was pretty cool. I'm not really sure, but we're vibing with it. And then there were some people that were like, I don't know about that. And I think both reactions are very fair. I thought that it was all very well done, in that it wraps up into this really beautifully violent package. I will say this is violent. There are, Colombian neckties, which I did not know what those were before reading this. I had heard the phrase, but I had never really thought about it or had it described to me. There's a lot of violence, a lot of violence. So keep that in mind. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed it. Next up is a book that I actually started during the Trans Rights Readathon, which I do have a vlog of that as well on my channel. I did that in March and I read the first half of this book for that video. I didn't get to finish it for the vlog, so I mentioned that I was going to talk about it in a future video, and that is Womb City by Tloto Samayase. This was really unusual, very surprising. It's an interesting hybrid story. So it's an African futurist horror thriller kind of a story. Again, I talked a little bit about this in my Trans Rights Readathon vlog, but to catch you up a little bit, this story follows our main character, Nayla, and in this world, technology has advanced such that human consciousness can be transferred from body to body. So bodies themselves are resources that are issued by the government, and each person gets 3 bodies or 3 lifespans to live out their 200 some allotted years of time. Memories aren't always transferred with the body, and sometimes there's gaps in memory and sometimes there is just a complete restart. And so our main character Nayla is in her 2nd lifespan. So she had her consciousness transferred to a new body. She has no memories of her past. And so she's transferred into the body of an 18-year-old, I believe. And so that 18-year-old's parents become her parents. And there's a lot of secrets and mystery regarding the history of the family. But what we do know is that the person who lived in Nayla's body before she did committed a crime. And when you commit a crime, even if the consciousness didn't commit the crime, you are put into that body and you are microchipped so that the government can watch you for criminal tendencies. So there is so much here to talk about. But I loved the way that the whole narrative really explores what society means by criminal and who is deemed criminal versus who is able to slip through the cracks due to their gender or their wealth. Oftentimes it is younger, poor women who are deemed criminal and who are microchipped so that a lot of the women in society are directly surveilled by the state. Also, a major crux of the narrative is that Nayla and her husband are trying to have a baby, and she has had several miscarriages, and so they use another form of advanced technology that basically they're able to incubate their baby in this womb incubator. There's so much about motherhood in this story and womanhood, but it's another very violent ghost revenge story. There's an element of haunting in the narrative. It was just really interesting, unlike anything that I have ever really read before, and I don't know, I loved the ending. It was another one that really stuck the landing at the end and was surprising. I had no idea where this was going. The audiobook is also really, really good. Okay, moving right along. This is another book that is directly coming from my Trans Rights Readathon experience, because during the Trans Rights Readathon, I read A Lady for All Seasons by TJ Alexander, which is a historical romance that I loved. It was so good. And so I went back and I read their other historical romance. It's not in the same series, but it's definitely set in the same world because there are shared characters between the 2 books. But that is A Gentleman's Gentleman. So this one was actually written first, and so I went back and I listened to it, and it was also so much fun. TJ Alexander just writes the most delightful, funny, drama-filled historical romance. Just start to finish, the characters have such spunk and personality. You can connect with the main characters instantly. I feel like the way that they're written, you're just instantly rooting for them and wanting the best for them, and they're funny and you just want to be their friend. The side characters are all also really great. And so this one is following, I think, Christopher. Lord Eden is his title, but I'm pretty sure his name's Christopher. And he has to marry by his 25th birthday in order to inherit the money that was promised to him. But his twin and his parents both died when he was a little bit younger, and so he's been on his own for a while, and he is more of like a recluse. He lives on his own in his estate with like 2 servants, and he's constantly removed from society, but he has to go to London to find a wife, so he hires a valet because he's never had a valet before. And would you believe his valet is really handsome and very intriguing, and so it's just a sweet little romance between Lord Eden and his valet. And so you learn very quickly through reading the book that one of the reasons that Christopher is so removed from society and has so few servants is that he is a trans man, and so trying to protect himself from any questions or, people looking for gossip or for anything to put him in danger. And so having a valet is really complicated for him because typically a valet would dress, their lord or whatever. And so he's like, I've been dressing myself my whole life. I don't need your help with that. And James is like, well, like, that's my job. What do you mean? And so, like, I don't know, the whole time they're kind of not like fighting, but like bickering because he's like, let me just like do things for you. And Christopher's like, I'm a grown man. I could do my things myself. I don't know. It was just really good. Very emotional at times and tender, but also just like funny and sweet and dramatic. And I don't know. It was so good. And I had a great time reading it. Okay. The angle switched again because Arista came over and headbutted the thing and threw everything off. Anyway, next up, okay, we're into books that I have read more or less this past week. So I finished 2 books this week, both of which have just got me thinking and reeling. And the first one is The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This is technically my first Stephen Graham Jones. I read the first like 80 pages of The Only Good Indians, but I put it down because there was some dog death and I wasn't ready for it. But I'm definitely going to have to return to it because I thoroughly enjoyed The Buffalo Hunter. The Buffalo Hunter is Stephen Graham Jones' most recent book as of right now. It just came out last year, and it is his take on indigenous vampire lore and the vampire story, and it's so good. I love a vampire story, to be clear, but this one in particular, really, really good. So it's a frame narrative, which I also am a sucker for. Let me give you the rundown on this. In the present, in like 2013, I think, is when we start the book. And Etsy, who is trying to get a foothold in academia, but doesn't really have anything to earn her tenure, she gets a hold of this manuscript from one of her distant great whatever grandfathers. And she's like, oh, I could transcribe this and maybe I'll get a book deal. And so she starts reading this manuscript. So that's the first perspective. And then she is reading the journal, diary, whatever, of her great whatever, Arthur Beaucarn. And he is writing in 1912 in the territory that becomes Montana before it becomes a state. And he's a Lutheran pastor in this remote-ish community. And so we are reading his diary and his, recounting of his experience as a pastor in this community. And then within that narrative, an indigenous person who is not from their community, starts coming to their services and staying after to confess to Arthur the things that he has done. And very quickly you learn to realize that this person, Goodstab, is a vampire. And so Goodstab, is telling Arthur the story of how he became a vampire and everything that has transpired since then. And his story begins, I think, in around the 1860s and then jumps all the way up to 1912 when Arthur is like taking down his confession or whatever. And then Arthur is then taking everything that Goodstab is telling him and writing it in his journal that then Etsy is reading. I will say, I'll start with the one sort of complaint that I have. Not really complaint, but there were moments where the narrative lost a little bit of its momentum, and therefore it lost me a little bit. But then there are times where it is just on, and I could barely put it down. The whole lore that Stephen Graham Jones constructs of the vampire and how specifically it subverts a lot of the like traditional vampire tropes from what is our like white media consciousness understanding of the vampire. Like there's a scene where Goodstab is literally looking at his reflection multiple times, I think, in like water or a mirror. So like, you know, he can see his reflection. And I don't know, because of my ignorance about indigenous vampire lore, I don't know if he is drawing a lot of the lore in his book from that, or if a lot of it is his own creation, or if it's a mixture, but it's very much playing with and subverting the colonizer perspective of what a vampire looks like and what a vampire is and like how to defeat a vampire, all of that. I don't want to say too much about it because part of the enjoyment for me was in hearing Goodstab's narrative and hearing him experiencing all of that and figuring out how to exist as a vampire. And even the 1912 timeline, I think mostly when the narrative lost me was certain parts of Arthur's diary where I just like, it hit a little bit of a slump, but for the most part, I also really enjoyed the more satirical part of his diary entries where Stephen Graham Jones, I think, is poking fun a little bit. He's very Arthur, the Lutheran pastor. He's very gluttonous. Like he's constantly described as, you know, like people will bring him sweets or food or whatever because he's the pastor, and he's constantly throughout the narrative saying like, oh, this time I'm gonna save it and let it get me through the week, and he just like inhales this food and like, I don't know, it's almost like a foil for the vampire in this like white character, this pastor, this preacher being so susceptible to the gluttony and the need to just consume, and like how whiteness and colonization is associated with its own sort of like parasite vampiric nature. But then on the other hand, you have Goodstab, who is trying to exist and not lose his identity and his connection with his home and community while also still being a vampire. I don't know. It was really well done. I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it. And I did it on audio. Absolutely, I can see how I think it won a couple awards as an audiobook specifically, and it is so well done. There's 3 different narrators for Goodstab, Arthur Bocarn, and Etsy, all of whom do a fantastic job. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. Second to last, we have the book that I finished right after I finished Buffalo Hunter, Oddbody by Rose Keating. This is a debut short story collection. Yes, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't lying to you. This is Rose Keating's debut short story collection, and she is an Irish author. She's from Waterford. It is one of my goals to read more contemporary Irish fiction and more Irish fiction in general. And so I picked this up because the cover was so interesting. And so I read the first few short stories in March, and then I switched to the audio. Like I started reading it physically, and then I switched to the audio. I was struggling a little bit at the beginning connecting with it. I feel like my least favorite stories were the first few, but then as soon as I hit Pineapple, which I think is the 4th story, I was instantly hooked after that. And then I listened to the whole thing in one go after that, and every story after that was an absolute banger. So I'm really glad that I kept pushing, because it wasn't that I didn't like the first couple. I think it was just, especially with short story collections, is you're getting to know the author's writing and like getting in their head a little bit. And so I feel like a lot of those first couple stories, I was just trying to, you know, orient myself in the writing, orient myself with how this author approaches storytelling. And once I was more situated in that and I switched to the audiobook, I really, really loved it. Honestly, it's so weird. This is like peak weird girl fiction. Like if you're a fan of Mona Awad, I think you would like this. It's just raw, unfiltered womanhood, but it's super bizarre. Like really, really weird. It's very unfiltered in its portrayal of the female body and female sexuality in a way that it's not really like divine feminine, and it's not really like feminine rage necessarily. It's more just like women being weird and like borderline gross, and like that empowering them. Again, I am not doing it justice, but it was just such an unusual time. Also, this cover is just so freaking cool. I will say my favorites were Pineapple. Eggshells was really, really weird. The Test and The Vegetable also both were really, really good. I think those are my favorites. Pineapple is sort of like a really dramatic, exaggerated reality where body modifications have taken on a whole new meaning. There's this artist who puts grafts of other animals' skins onto people, and like at one point the main character gets wings stitched to her back. It's super bizarre. Eggshells is about this woman who lays eggs, like literal eggs every day. The Test is like what I take it to be is it's like a satire of romantasy, but like a very violent and gruesome satire of romantasy. And then The Vegetable, I don't even know. All I'm gonna say is look at the cover. So if you do give it a try and the first few stories don't do it for you, I would keep pushing. I'm gonna definitely keep an eye out for more of Rose Keating's stuff. I would love to read a full-length novel by her. Okay, last but not least, the last 3 books we have to talk about are in a series. And so I'm just going to go real quickly because I have started and been flying through the Second Era Mistborn books by Brandon Sanderson. Just for a little recap, I've read the original Mistborn trilogy. I've read Warbreaker, and I've read all of the Stormlight archive content by Brandon Sanderson. I've also read Tress of the Emerald Sea. And so the next big project for me in order to continue on the Cosmere journey is to read Mistborn Era 2, which is, it takes place like a couple hundred years after the original Mistborn trilogy, and it's like a steampunk Western style, but like with the Mistborn magic system. And I am literally flying through these books. I read 3 of them in like a week and a half. So I read the first one, which is The Alloy of Law. I read the second one, Shadows of Self. And then this morning I finished The Bands of Mourning. They are shorter by Brandon Sanderson's standards. They're very fast paced. They're very entertaining, but lower stakes, which he has in his acknowledgments at the beginning of the book. He's said that they are meant to be a more fast and action-packed series that counterbalances the epic fantasy of Stormlight. And so we're following our main characters, Wax and Wayne, who are lawmen, detectives, if you will, but like, I don't know, not your typical detectives. And they're both twin-born, so they each have an allomantic and ferrochemical ability. If you haven't read Mistborn, that's all going to be nonsense to you. They're definitely not his best work, but I am also of the unpopular opinion that I didn't really love Mistborn, the original trilogy. I liked them all. I gave them all like 4 stars. My absolute favorite character is Sazed. I love him and would die for him. I'm having a good time. There's like a lot of callbacks to the original trilogy, which is fun. There are some cameos even from the original trilogy, which is interesting. And I think it's fun to see how allomancy and like the whole Mistborn world is functioning in this like future timeline where like electricity and motor cars are being invented. And so you get to see how it operates in more of like a world that's closer to ours. They're funny. And I think because I have been reading a lot of mysteries this year and really enjoying the mystery genre as of late, I do think it's heightening my enjoyment. I think if I would have read these a couple years ago, I would have been like, okay. If you're a Brandon Sanderson fan, if you're a Mistborn fan, I think you'll like them. But if you haven't read Brandon Sanderson, I do not recommend starting with Mistborn. I mean, people will tell you that you should start with Mistborn, and like if you want to read the Cosmere, you probably should start with Mistborn, but start with Warbreaker. That is my unpopular opinion. Alexander is reading The Way of Kings right now. I have him hooked. He's at like 70%, and I just like, I love hearing his little theories because he has no idea what's gonna happen. I'm like, oh, it's so cute. But yeah, that is the last set of books that we had to talk about for this video. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if you're gonna add any of them to your TBR. I love them all. You know, I thoroughly enjoyed them. I recommend them all. I would love to talk about them in the comments down below. Also, if you've read anything really good recently that you want to chat about, let me know. I love a good recommendation. Thank you so much for coming by my channel today. It means the world to me. I love you all. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if that's your jam, and I hope to see you in my next video. Happy reading, happy writing, happy living. Peace out.